One of those questions I get almost any time I add a new enclosure to the room is, how do you find space for all this stuff? The reality is that I don't have a ton of space to work with down here. I'm constantly playing Tetris to make all of the pieces fit, but as I see it, there's still a lot of empty shapes I have yet to fill in. An area I felt was really underutilized was actually not in here, but in my laundry room. Historically, this has always just been a quarantine area, but I've really been beefing it up to be much more than that. As you can tell though, I already got a lot done, so let me bring you up to speed. Previously, I had an old wire rack in this area. It served me well for many years, but it couldn't hold a lot of weight, and I was actually able to fit something much larger in this area. Initially, I was going to go the DIY route, but that's not always the best option. Instead, I went with one of these steel husky shelves. It seemed like a better way to go because they're easy to build, so I didn't have to take the time to do all the measurements and that sort of thing. They're also adjustable, so if need be I can move the shelves over time, and they can also hold 1,500 pounds per shelf, so with an area like this aquarium set up here, which is probably going to be around 600 pounds, there's no worry that it's going to break the shelf or anything like that. There is a slight issue though. These wire shelves are not really ideal for aquariums. That's an easy fix though. All I did was cut out some 1/2 inch thick plywood. Now I just separated it into 2 pieces because of the width of the shelf. I also spray painted them black for a cleaner look. Now I could have just set the boards on top of the wires, but I wanted things to be a little bit more stable, so I secured them from underneath with some 2x4s. For lighting, I decided to go with these 6-foot LEDs I got from my friends over at ReefBrite. These were originally intended to be above the 600. Unfortunately, they were way too long for inside of the canopy, so I put them over here instead because of the low profile. Again, just trying to keep that clean aesthetic, and I simply just zip tied them to the shelves. Once I got those details addressed, I could finally get to the fun part and start installing the tanks. So what I have here are 6 10-gallon tanks. They seemed like the best way to go. They fit the space really well, but before I could install those, I had to do some work on them. Now I wanted to make this an easy setup for me as far as maintenance is concerned with draining and doing water changes and that sort of thing, so I drilled all of these tanks. I checked for placement on the back of the tanks with the bulkhead and made a jig accordingly. I used this to create consistent holes in all of the tanks. Again, I'm going for a really clean and cohesive aesthetic here, so I decided to black out the backs of the tanks. I'm using some window tint film for this. I just spray down the tanks and apply it like usual. From there, I outfitted the bulkheads with the PVC pipes and installed them in the tanks. I checked for placement and installed the subsequent pieces accordingly. With something like that in place, it should really cut down on maintenance time. Here, let's take a closer look. On the back of each tank, you'll see this PVC apparatus. All that it is a straight PVC that goes to a T-splitter, which splits off into 2 directions. I have another PVC that goes straight up to just below the top of the tank, so that way the water doesn't overflow from here, and then on the bottom end it goes to a ball valve. I have the top open like this, so that way whenever you open the ball valve, the water can drain faster. On the bottom here, you'll see that all of the tanks are connected through the drain system. Now when I set this up, I needed it to slant down towards the left so that way the water wouldn't collect in any of these areas, and the way that I did that was simple. The pipe in between the connections here is increased by 1/2 inch with each step that we go to the left. So on the right it's 1 inch long, and on the left it's 3.5 inches long. You'll see that I also connected the pieces with vinyl tube. I did this because it's flexible, so it can actually take that angle better than a PVC pipe could do, and of course I also secured them with some hose clamps. I should also mention that all of the various PVC connections were secured with PVC cement. Enough on that though, why don't we see how it works? On this end I've got the system's exit tube. For now I'll just kind of put it in a bucket like this. And then you just let it rip. And in about a minute I was able to drain 50% of that tank. I'm going to do the other ones here and then I'll show you a little bit more. That took almost no time. I can definitely see it being a game changer while maintaining my stuff in the future. Let me show you how the tanks actually work though. Since we just drained the tanks, we might as well start there. I have each of the bulkheads outfitted with a little strainer so that way we don't suck up any of the fish. However, for some of the ones that are super small, I even took the precaution to put a little sponge filter over it. And since we're talking about sponges, I might as well go ahead and show you the filtration because that's exactly what I'm using here. Sponge filters, they're cheap, they're easy to use, easy to swap out if need be. And I was already using them over here, so it just made sense to use them in these tanks as well. Above all of the tanks, you'll see that each sponge filter is powered by its own USB air pump. Initially I was going to go with a linear piston air pump to power the entire system with a single unit, but I already had 4 of these, and to only spend $20 to get 2 more, that just made the most sense. Plus to only do 6 small tanks, it really would have been overkill for that, but if I ever had more, it might make sense to upgrade to that. Each one of the pumps is also outfitted with a control valve, so that way I could dictate how strong the flow is. Another thing worth mentioning is that since this is all overhead, there was no need to use a check valve. The last major component I have here are the lids, and for all of the tanks I'm using the dual wall polycarbonate. I like this because I can just buy a single sheet, cut it out to the sizes I need on the table saw, and it's indestructible, so if I drop them on the floor or whatever, no big deal. I just drill a little hole up here in the front that I can use to open it. It also allows for some air exchange, and it acts as an easy port to feed off the fish. I can just go through and it streamlines the entire process. And of course I cut out one of the corners so that way the airline can go down to the filter. And that's a quick overview of the tanks. I'll show you what's actually in them here in a moment, but I'll be right back. I'm gonna go grab something that I can't wait to share with you. What I have here are 2 custom built PVC vivariums. Now your first question might be, what is the deal with the difference in size? So it was basically just because of material cost. Building them like this was the cheapest way to go, as opposed to doing 2 or 3 that were the same size. I think these look extremely nice in this space, and they're really easy to build. You can get PVC board at just about any home improvement store, and you can process it the same as wood. What I did was cut out a series of boards on the table saw. Each tank is composed of 8 or 9 boards, so it was really not that much work. After that, I went around the edges where the boards will meet and pre-drilled for some screws. I applied silicone along the corresponding edges and locked the pieces together. When you're building PVC enclosures, you can use PVC cement like I showed earlier to actually fuse the pieces together. Instead, what I'm doing here is putting the silicone in between the pieces to create a gasket of sorts, which is pressure sealed in with the screws. So it's still going to keep the piece watertight with minimal effort. What I mean is that if I had used cement, I would have had to clamp the pieces together and all that kind of stuff, and I just didn't feel like dealing with it. Screwing the pieces together was easy, and I was able to build the tanks pretty quickly. Once the main structures were put together, I went around and covered in all the holes on the front. I let that dry and sanded it down. Then I went around and taped off the inside of the enclosure because I want that area to remain white. I went on to spray paint the exterior of the tanks black. I know I keep saying it, but again, to keep with this nice clean aesthetic, painting these black just really made them look nice. When the paint dried, I went ahead and added a little trim border on the top for the lid to rest in. You can use various materials depending on what you want to do with these, but I'm simply just going to use that polycarbonate I showed earlier. I applied a bead of silicone around the trim, put the polycarbonate into that, and then secured it with stainless steel staples. Then I used super glue to secure the glass tracks. Like usual, I cut out the pieces myself and put them in place. Where these come into play, at least for now, are for my terrestrial plants. As many of you know, I've been using these gasket boxes for a while now, and they do a great job. You really don't have to water them or anything like that because it kind of creates its own terrarium. But the issue with it is that you can't see all of these beautiful plants through the sides, and as you can tell, I've pretty much run out of space here. I was able to consolidate all 4 of my plant bins into this single vivarium, and there's still extra room, which is great. Since we're down here and I love my plants, I figured I'd give you a few highlights. First is the Downy Rattlesnake Plantain Orchid. This is actually one that grows locally around here and it's really beautiful. The other thing about it is that it's hard to get an established plant like that that's not sourced from the wild. So my recommendation would be to buy seeds. They're pretty easy to obtain and they're fairly inexpensive, and grow yourself a plant like that because they're awesome. You also can't have a proper planting area without some Ficus pumila quercifolia or oak leaf creeping fig. This was actually in a dedicated bin, and so I just moved it into this little tray and put it in there. At first glance, you probably thought this was moss, but if you take a closer look, it's actually a mini liverwort, and it's awesome. As for the smaller vivarium, I just left it empty for now since I was able to fit all of the other plants in the other one. Now I have a few ideas on what I could do with it. Let me know what you think. The first thing I was thinking about was a moss only setup. I was thinking just literally a flat carpet of moss in there that I could use as a propagation area and take it out as I need it. And then option 2 I think is the obvious thing, and it's just to set it up like a vivarium, make it look nice, and again it's still used for moss propagation, it's still used for plant propagation and everything like that, but it's basically just an enclosure that looks nice but I pull things from it. And that's basically the other idea I have for this larger vivarium as well. Wouldn't it be cool if I had this scaped up like a nice vivarium with all the plants and everything in there, but it's used with the intent to propagate things. So I'll have a cleanup crew, springtails, isopods, all that stuff living in here doing their thing. And if I ever need any of them or substrate, I can just pull a clump out of here, put it in one of my other tanks, as well as propagate the plants and do that sort of thing. I think it would be cool, but it would be impossible to isolate the plants like I do now. Perhaps I could leave these ones as is and do something like that up on the top rack. That leads to my next question. What do you think I should do on the top shelf here? I left it empty for now because I was really focusing on what I was doing down here, and I have so many ideas on what I could do up here, but I'm curious to know what you think. Let me know in the comments. And last but not least, we'll take a quick look at all of these aquariums to my left. I'm going to keep this one on the down low for now because they're going into a new build that I'm working on right now, and I want them to be the star of it. I'm sure if you go back through the footage you could find out what they are, but I don't want to explicitly say for now. Anyway, in this tank here I've got the Serpae Tetras and the leopard frog plecos from that tank I set up at Aquashella. Now the Serpae Tetras are going to go into the 350 along with the blacktail hemiotis, which are actually already living in there. They love it. They are great additions to the tank. And you might be thinking, Tanner, those fish, they're fin nippers. They're known fin nippers. And that is true, but when you have a huge school like this, they only gang up on each other. They're not really going to bother the other fish. I'm sure if it becomes a prevalent issue, I could just always take them out. But that's going to be easier said than done in a big tank like that. So hopefully it's not a problem. As for the leopard frog plecos, I think that I actually want to just try to start a breeding colony, so I'll just leave the 3 of them in this tank. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to start a breeding operation. If not, then I'll get more, but I guess we'll just see what happens with that one. Moving over, we have some beautiful fish, which actually aren't even mine. I'm just growing them out for a friend of mine, and I'm going to be doing a trade with him. More on that in the future, but what I got in here are some Sterbai Corydoras, as well as some CPDs, Celestial Pearl Danios, or Galaxy Rasbora, whatever you prefer to call them, and of course some Amano Shrimp. I'm just letting them do their thing in here for a little while, and I don't know, maybe like 4 to 5 weeks or so, we'll be doing the trade, so stay tuned for that. Moving over again, we have just a few fish that I'm going to be adding to that blackwater setup I did not too long ago. I have some Pygmy Corydoras, which I've been trying to get for a while, but they're really not too available around my area, so I finally was able to pick some of those up, as well as some golden neon tetras. I thought those would be the perfect addition, but I think I might have to get some more because I only have 4 of them right now. In this one, nothing too crazy, just some Java moss. I figured it's something that I'm using all the time, I might as well have a dedicated tank for it. At least for now while I'm still sort of getting my groove for everything down here. In this last one though, this is probably one of the better ones that I've set up here, or at least for me. I'm using it as a plant propagation station, so anytime that I'm trimming stuff out of my plants or that sort of thing, just plant them in here, grow them out so that way I can use them for future builds and nothing goes to waste. Something else I forgot to mention is that I've got Süßwasser tongue in a lot of these setups, as well as other plants, so I'm kind of doing double duty, quarantine, growing out plants, all that kind of stuff, just trying to use the most of my space down here. And that's all I have for you in this one, my friends. It's kind of like, it's my second animal room, right? We'll call it that, A2, how about that? Anyway, I was really excited to share it with you because I've been working on it for at least a month, maybe 2 months at this point, and to finally see the pieces come together like this, it's just really exciting. And sure, there's still more that I have to do, but I'm really liking how it looks. Gotta do something up on the top shelf. Again, let me know what you want to see there. The middle shelf will kind of be ever changing here as I get new tanks, as I take ones down, all that kind of stuff. So expect changes here. And then on the bottom, open for interpretation still. I don't know. We'll see what I do there. But that's all I have for you in this one, Serpa Squad. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care and peace.